we're there to support you if that takes place. So I just thought I'd say a little bit about the nuclear free local authorities. The first thing to do is to cast your mind back, if you can, if you're old enough, to November 1980. In the UK, we had a relatively new government led by Margaret Thatcher, who was adamant that local authorities in the UK should make preparations and spend money on civil defence in readiness for the possibility of nuclear war. 45 years on, it seems like we're revisiting that scenario. But at the time, a lot of local authorities were adamant that this was a waste of money, a waste of effort. And Manchester, which is where I'm based, Lisa, in the northwest of England, actually passed a resolution in November 1980 to become the world's first nuclear-free local authority, which was even more fitting because Manchester was also the place where the atom was actually first split at Manchester University. So we made that declaration in November 1980. Essentially, it was about protesting about preparations for nuclear war and refusing to participate in them as a local authority. But that declaration then spurred many, many other local authorities in the UK and around the world to make similar declarations. Around 200 towns and cities did so in the UK and about 2,000 internationally. And in the UK, in the autumn of 1981, there was actually a conference held to which delegates from all the UK authorities that made that declaration were invited. And about 120 did actually send representatives to the conference. And from that activity, the Nuclear Free Local Authorities was born. So the Secretariat has always been based in Manchester, Northwest England. And it's always had a remit of being particularly anti-nuclear weapons. So just to mention nuclear weapons, we are a partner in the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, ICAN. And we're also heavily involved as a city in Mayors for Peace, as I see Jackie's on the call, so you know that very well. But in terms of nuclear-free local authorities, we're now more focused on civil nuclear power and opposing that and promoting renewables. And what we do is essentially we have local authorities at various levels around the UK and Ireland, from large cities like Manchester, like Hull, like Edinburgh, through to tiny, what we call parish councils, which are the kind of the lowest level of local authority in the UK. One of them, for instance, being Bradwell-on-Sea, which is near a former power station, now no longer generating in Essex. So we cover a whole range of local authorities. And what we are is effectively a lobby group for local authorities who are opposed to civil nuclear power and supportive of renewables. And how we do that is we have a steering committee that sets policy and basically tasks me with carrying out that policy. We have national forums. So we have a forum for Scotland and one for Wales. The England one, we don't have many members, so it's not really functional. But our Scottish forum especially is very, very active. What we do is we have various functions that we carry out. A big part of the role, I should say I'm the only person employed directly by the NFLAs. A big part of the role is about providing information. So I regularly issue press releases. I know some of you are on my mailing list, so you'll see these on a regular basis. I do press releases, I issue newsletters. We also do specialist bulletins on a range of subjects pertinent to our remit. We provide advice. I provide advice to local authorities who maybe are facing the prospect of a nuclear project. And more as a point in terms of advice and support, I also support many, many community groups that are opposed to nuclear power in the UK and also in Ireland to some degree. A big part of what we do is influencing and campaigning. So I sit on a number of non-government organisation forums with officials, with regulators. So there are a number of bodies that we interact with at a national level. So we have the Office for Nuclear Regulation, which does what it says on the tin, effectively regulates new and existing nuclear power generators and other licensed nuclear sites. We have the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, which some of us being wags like to call Disney. Um, uh, and that basically sets government policy at Whitehall related to nuclear. And there's also a body called the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority, which is basically a taxpayer-funded body that's responsible for decommissioning former power stations and managing radioactive waste at all levels. And I think in terms of the NDA group, the most prominent site that most people will have heard of is Sellafield, which is clearly the biggest site that they manage, and that's where they keep the majority of high level nuclear waste, pending what they hope will end up being a transition to a geological disposal facility. So I sit on various forums related to that, having input into policy and also into direction of nuclear matters. We also do a lot of work around campaigning. So a big part of my time is lobbying ministers, is lobbying regulators, is lobbying industry people, and also trying to get our messages out to media, which, as many of you on this call will know, is very, very difficult, particularly in the current environment, where we've got a very, much of our media is very pro-nuclear. Obviously, many of our politicians are pro-nuclear, and to be honest, that's going to get harder to get those messages across, particularly since the recent visit by President Trump to the UK, at which part of that was a spin-off where there was a memorandum of understanding signed, which will bring about greater cooperation between the UK and the US on nuclear issues. So that's going to make it harder still for us to get those messages out. But nonetheless, that's the function of the NFLAs. In effect, it's to lobby, it's to influence, it's to try and get messages out and information messages out that contradict and challenge the kind of accepted narrative that is being pushed by industry, by trade unions, by politicians, and by the media. Um, the other thing I was asked, Gordon asked me about was you asked me specifically, do we have any kind of victories that we might ascribe to NFLA? I would say we obviously work collectively, as I'm sure you do as well. But there are a number of things I would say where we've certainly contributed to making a difference. One of the big things, and it relates to the remit really we've got tonight to look at, is around the disposal of high-level nuclear waste. The NFLA's policy has always been in support of rolling stewardship in bespoke on-site or near-site, near-surface or on-surface facilities, rather than disposal in what we call a geological disposal facility here or a deep geological repository. And one of the things that I've been very heavily involved in the 4 years, almost 4 years I've been in post, is supporting groups that have been opposed to nuclear waste dumps in their locality. And two of our victories are actually to get our nuclear decommissioning authority to withdraw from South Holderness in Yorkshire and Lincolnshire, which are both on the east coast of England, both of which were targeted for a GDF and were defeated because of public protests and because of the support of local councillors, elected members. And we had a big part in that, which has included providing a lot of practical help, support, advice to facilitate those campaigns. I think another thing that we've had quite a big influence on is around um, taxonomy. There was a proposal to replicate what the European Union had done and introduce a favourable financial model that would encourage more investment, private sector investment into nuclear, and that was defeated. That was something we were very heavily involved against. Opposing this taxonomy, and the government recently decided to not proceed with that. Another thing that I've been involved in, but this was very definitely a collective effort, was to get the Office of Nuclear Regulation to actually charge its inspectors with carrying out inspections of nuclear sites to determine how prepared they were for the impact of climate change on licensed nuclear sites, and particularly flooding being a big issue, sea level rise. The issue we've got is very much almost all our nuclear sites are on a coastal historically, and some of them are very definitely going to be subject to quite severe sea level rise over coming decades. So that was taken on board, and there were a number of inspections carried out, and a recent report published around that. That's something we'll continue to press on. And another concern we've had is around, particularly around our second generation reactors that were kind of commissioned 80s, 1980s, what called advanced, they're not advanced now, advanced gas cool reactors, which are reliant on a graphite core. And there's a big issue around cracking in those graphite cores because of the passage of time and how that compromises safety. You might have seen recently that EDF Energy, which is a British subsidiary of the French state-owned company, decided to try to keep two of those AGR plants open for a further year. And we've been pressing the Office for Nuclear Regulation to ensure that they are carrying out inspections of these graphite cores for safety. And I think that regime of inspection has been largely down to us, actually pushing them quite heavily, from the chief nuclear inspector down to carry out those tests. And the last thing I'll mention, there's a couple of other things, but the last thing I'll mention, which is a really important one, is the fact that the NFLAs for decades have been pushing the government to actually finally declare plutonium a waste product and actually immobilize it. And you may have seen that at the beginning of this year, the government actually decided to do that. There's been a lot of, there's been, I don't know how much pressure, but there's been a certain amount of pressure, certainly by trade unions and also by some developers like Nucleo being a good example, where they've actually wanted government to redeploy that plutonium as a fuel product for reactors, new reactors. And we were adamant that that shouldn't be the case, and certainly that's something the NFLAs have been quite active in pushing, because Britain has the biggest civil managed stockpile of plutonium. It's about 140 tons that's actually held at Sellafield at the moment. And you may have seen that the government's recently decided to invest a significant amount of money in actually developing new facilities there in order to actually begin that process of immobilisation. So that's something that we're delighted about and pleased to have played a part in bringing about. So I'll end it there. Obviously, happy to answer any questions later. Thank you. And can I introduce Gordon now, who's going to speak?
Mute myself. Hello. Thank you very much, Richard. That was really interesting. And it really highlights the importance of international cooperation. The nuclear industry is very much international. What happens in one country affects what happens in many other countries. And I think the movement for clean energy and the movement for safe procedures going forwards that are non-nuclear, we have to try and become a little more international as well. And that's one of the things that led Mary Beth Brangan, I think, to suggest this particular webinar. We don't have a particular organizational structure, but we're thinking of at least loosely calling it a Transatlantic Nuclear Free Alliance, involving the Canadian Coalition for Nuclear Responsibility, the San Onofre people, perhaps some other American groups, and perhaps some other Canadian groups. And we'll see where it goes. We won't concentrate on organizational matters, but rather on how we can at least exchange information and stay in touch. I'd like to touch on a few things. The first thing is that what makes nuclear power very different from any other technology is that primarily it's not a producer of electricity, but rather a producer of very long-lived radioactive waste, including plutonium. That's the real ultimate production of a nuclear reactor. What you get is a little blip at the beginning, a couple of decades, a few decades of electricity, but that's gone. And then the nuclear waste is there forever. And the nuclear waste becomes a real threat to the environment and to the peace and security of the planet, because the nuclear waste contains plutonium, which is the fundamental material in almost all nuclear weapons in the world's nuclear arsenals. And plutonium, once it is produced, as was touched upon by Richard, is actually not destructible in an easy way. And we don't know how to destroy it. We don't know how to eliminate it. And rather than turning it into a commodity, which is what the nuclear industry is trying to do in many different countries, they call it reprocessing. They call it recycling nuclear fuel. They call it burning up the waste. But what it really is a scheme to extract the plutonium from the irradiated nuclear fuel and use that plutonium in one form or another as another nuclear fuel that could extend the life of the nuclear era, the nuclear energy era, for a great deal longer period of time than would otherwise be possible using only natural uranium. And so you have to be aware of these terms. They try to avoid using the word plutonium because they know it has bad connotations for very good reasons. And so they use these other terms instead. So let me just point out that the nuclear waste that is created inside a nuclear reactor is the only type of technology that produces actually new poisonous elements that never existed in nature before 1940. That's what nuclear power does. It creates hundreds and hundreds of new elements, radioactive elements, whose atoms are unstable. These unstable atoms disintegrate, which means that they will basically explode. And that's what makes them more dangerous than non-radioactive materials. Even when you have a non-radioactive toxic material, like, for example, lead, which is a very dangerous heavy metal, there's nothing worse than a heavy metal than a radioactive heavy metal. And there's radioactive isotopes of lead-210, which are far more dangerous than lead alone. In fact, the quantity, because the energy of radioactivity comes from the nucleus of the atom, it is millions of times more effective, more dangerous, more energetic than energy from chemical reactions of any sort. So the result is that even tiny amounts of radioactive material can be deadly. You may have heard of the radium dial painters, these young teenage girls, many hundreds of which died of radium poisoning back in the 1920s and 1930s. And there's a book, very good one, Radium Girls, which describes it in considerable detail. The maximum amount of radium they found in these dead girls after they did autopsies was 18 micrograms of radium. Now, that's a quantity so small that it would be invisible to the eye. You wouldn't be able to see it. And yet that material was dispersed throughout their body in such a way that every bone in their body was radioactive. And the quantity was so small that chemical methods were unable to detect it. And that's how they got away with it for a period of time, because chemists couldn't find the radium. The only way you could detect it was by radiological analysis. At any rate, this is what makes nuclear waste so dangerous, is that it's capable of causing literally billions of human cancers if it were dispersed into the environment. In 1978, I wanted to, before saying 1978, I wanted to mention that during the first 30 years of the nuclear age, when many of the nuclear reactors in North America were built, there have been very, very few constructed since 1978, only a handful. The ones down in South Carolina and Georgia. The South Carolina ones were scrapped. The two Georgia ones are started up. Those are the only nuclear reactors that have been built in North America since 1978. And it was only in that period of time, in the mid-1970s, that people for the first time learned that nuclear waste is a problem. Because we were told in the first 30 years that nuclear power is completely safe, completely clean, and that implies that there is no waste problem. And that's what most politicians and what most of the general public believe, that this was a problem-free technology. So it came as a shock in the mid-70s when it was discovered that this is a major unsolved problem of the human race, and that it dwarfs any other waste problem we've ever dealt with in the past. In 1978, for example, the US Geological Survey published a multi-authored report called Geological Perspectives on Radioactive Waste. And they pointed out that just to dramatize the danger of this waste, they said that if you took the waste in the USA, the high-level waste, and asked yourself the question, how much water would you need to dissolve all of that material to the maximum level of contamination in water, drinking water, allowed by law? And the answer is very shocking. It would require more than twice all the fresh water in the entire world. And that dramatizes the fact that this waste has to be isolated from the environment to an extraordinarily high degree, to almost a perfect degree. So at that period of time, a number of reports in the UK, the US, and Canada concluded that unless they can solve this problem pretty soon, that there shouldn't be any more nuclear reactors built. We should just stop. This is not the path that we should be going down. That was a generalized consensus at that time. And the industry said, oh, the nuclear waste, yes, we forgot to mention it, but by the way, we do know exactly what to do with it. We bury it in a hole deep underground, and it'll never come back again. It'll never bother us anymore. And that's what the origin of the DGR concept is. It's basically a bluff, because they have no way of demonstrating that this is actually safe. What they do is they amass a lot of scientific data, and they say that proves it's safe. Well, a Nobel Prize-winning physicist, Hannes Alfvén from Sweden, said you cannot claim that this problem is solved just by pointing to all the efforts that have been made to solve it. There's undoubtedly been billions of dollars spent on trying to solve this problem. It remains unsolved. And as a result of that, our organization, the Canadian Coalition for Nuclear Responsibility, has advocated against transporting this waste across the country and burying it deep underground, when it'll probably come back to haunt us, but rather to adopt a policy of rolling stewardship, where you keep an eye on this waste. You're able to monitor it, you're able to retrieve it, you're able to make repairs, you're able to repackage the waste if it starts leaking, and you're also able to educate. You must, in fact, educate the next generation. It's an intergenerational problem. It has to be passed on to the next generation with all full knowledge and resources to deal with that problem, because we do know how to keep it out of the environment for the most part. We do know how to keep it out of the environment. And if it does start leaking, we do know how to make corrections to that. But if we bury it underground, there is no monitoring, there is no retrieval, there's nobody home. And if and when it does start leaking back into the environment, it's much too late to take any corrective action, because the damage has already been done deep underground, way out of the sight of humans. There's another aspect to this, and that is the plutonium contained in the waste is enough for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of nuclear weapons. Plutonium is a primary nuclear explosive material. And to allow this material to accumulate in various forms in various countries of the world is just sowing the seeds of our own destruction, because that material can be retrieved anytime in the next 10,000 years by any regime where there has been nuclear power and utilized for nuclear weapons. Plutonium is not found in nature. It's totally human-made. There are tiny trace amounts of plutonium created, as we know, by natural processes, but not enough to make any kind of a bomb. It's only if you find a substantial deposit of plutonium anywhere on Earth, it's human-made, and it's from the production of nuclear reactors. So with regard to the new generation of nuclear reactors that are being proposed, our perspective is, that is the Canadian Coalition for Nuclear Responsibility, our perspective is that this is completely inappropriate because 30 years ago, around 30 years ago, back in the mid-70s, 50 years ago, it was concluded by various governments that there should be no new nuclear reactors unless this problem is solved. In fact, the Flowers report from Britain, which was written, Sir Brian Flowers was a nuclear physicist who worked in both the civilian and military nuclear programs in Britain. He said that in his report, which is a Royal Commission on Environmental Pollution for Nuclear Power and the Environment, he concluded that we are agreed that it would be irresponsible and morally wrong to burden future generations with nuclear power unless it can be demonstrated that there is at least one method for safely isolating this material from the environment of living things. Now, it cannot be demonstrated. You can demonstrate that you can put the waste down in the hole. You can't demonstrate it's going to stay there. In fact, there is no principle in science that allows us to say that because we put something in one place, that it will stay there for millions of years. And we're talking here about a period of time of more than 10 million years. There is a graph published by the Royal Commission on Electric Power Planning in Ontario that was focusing on nuclear power and nuclear waste. And this graph shows 10 million years, the radiotoxicity of buried nuclear fuel from a CANDU reactor in Canada, 1 year's worth of nuclear waste. Over 10 million years, it turns out that after 10 million years, it's more toxic than it was after 50,000 years. And that's because as the atoms are disintegrating, little explosions are going on, they actually change into other elements. And sometimes those other elements are more radioactive than the ones you started with. We know this, for example, with connection with radon gas. You've heard of radon gas, which is a byproduct of uranium. When radon gas is breathed into the lungs, it's the #1 cause of lung cancer among non-smokers. But when the radon gas atoms disintegrate, because they are radioactive, and they do this rather quickly, when they disintegrate, they turn into other materials called polonium isotopes, polonium-218, polonium-214, and eventually polonium-210. And that's actually what does 85% of the lung damage to people who get lung cancer from breathing radon gas. So what happens is the polonium that is produced by the radon gas is far more toxic than the radon itself. Similarly, when you bury this waste or store this waste in any way, it actually produces materials in the long run that are far more toxic than the ones you started with, and sometimes much more long-lived as well. Plutonium, for instance, has a 24,000-year half-life. That means half of the atoms will disintegrate in 24,000 years, leaving the other half to disintegrate later. But when those atoms disintegrate, they don't disappear. They turn into another material, which has a half-life of 600 million years. So the 24,000-year-old plutonium, people say, oh, well, in 48,000 years, it's gone, or at least greatly diminished. The answer is no, it's not gone. It is greatly diminished, but it has been replaced by another radioactive material with a 600 million year half-life. So to make a long story short, we really feel that international cooperation will help us to come to grips with stopping the efforts to commercialize plutonium. The problem with commercializing plutonium is that as soon as you make plutonium available, there's only one way to do it, and that's to destroy the fuel bundles that we now have. The fuel bundles that we now have are solid, they're extremely radioactive and extremely dangerous. They are the containers of hundreds of radioactive materials inside. When you destroy the fuel bundle by whatever means, dissolving it in an acid or dissolving it in molten salt, you release all of the radioactive materials inside the fuel bundle, and you make the problem far worse and far more difficult to manage than originally. But what's even more dangerous than that is you make that plutonium available for whatever purpose people want to put it to. And yes, they can use it as nuclear fuel, but they can equally well use it for nuclear weapons. And so by spreading the technology, particularly when it comes to extracting plutonium for whatever purpose, this leads to horrendous problems for the future. I'll just mention that at Hanford, Washington, where they did, the first reactors were built precisely for the purpose of producing plutonium for bombs. That was the very first purpose of reactors. And at Hanford, Washington, that's where they reprocessed, destroyed the fuel bundles to get out the plutonium, and they created hundreds of tanks of high-level radioactive liquid waste. The cost of cleaning up the Hanford facility, according to the U.S. General Accounting Office, Government Accounting Office, they've called it now, is between the astonishing figure of $300 billion to $460 billion. This is amazing. And there's the liability that we're talking about. So I think that as citizens of the world, we have to remind people of these unique dangers which long outlive the nuclear power plant, whatever the benefits or non-benefits of nuclear power might be, and they are very costly. They're much more expensive than virtually any other form of energy that we can do, especially the non-carbon emitting energies like wind and solar. But regardless of what you think about nuclear power as an electricity producer, the problem that it leaves behind is a major unsolved problem of the human race, and it really has the seeds of destruction on an enormous scale, due not only to the waste itself, but to the plutonium contained therein. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gordon. Now, Gordon, would you like to introduce Brennain?
Oh, yes, Brennain, I'm sorry. My good colleague Brennain has been a tireless champion against small Indigenous communities and non-Indigenous communities being saddled with all the nuclear waste produced in large southern cities, which get all the benefits in terms of electricity, and they want to get rid of the waste. And so they say, well, why don't we take it to some isolated community where nobody, i.e. nobody of importance, lives? So Brennain, please take it away.
Great, thank you, Gordon. And one of those of no significant importance. So I'm going to give a very fast-paced run through our world right now. I'm going to talk about nuclear waste transportation and burial in Northern Ontario, Canada, as proposed by the Nuclear Waste Management Organization. One of their representatives, Vince Ponca, is on this webinar with us today. So I'm not actually joining from home, so I'm hoping that the technology will work. We'll see. Doesn't seem to be. Oh, there we go. So Gordon has covered very well. Nuclear waste is a problem. Toxic, radioactive, virtually into perpetuity. And it's 1 million times more radioactive than the uranium goes in and remains that way for 1 million years. The Nuclear Waste Management Organization is the association of nuclear power companies in Canada who generate the waste. And in 2002, were given a mandate by the federal government, tragically, given a mandate by the federal government to develop a long-term strategy or management system for the waste. And since 2010, they investigated 22 communities. 2020, they shortlisted to just 2, the Rebel site between Ignis and Dryden in northwestern Ontario, and the Teeswater site in South Bruce in southwestern Ontario. And in November of last year, they selected the Rebel site as their preferred location. I'm trying to get the slides to move on, doesn't want to do it. There we go. So the Rebel site's the headwaters of the Wabigoon River in the heart of treaty-free territory in northwestern Ontario. And just weeks before the NWMO announced that they had selected that site, Grand Council Treaty 3 Assembly of Chiefs pass a unanimous resolution opposing, again, expressing their opposition to the nuclear industry's presence in their territory and intentions for their territory. And that is broad spread. All of the treaty areas along the transportation route and where communities have been investigated have made similar resolutions over the years. Nevertheless, so the waste is going to come from great distances. On average, it's 1,700 kilometers for the sites in southern Ontario, longer for the sites in New Brunswick and Quebec. And of course, there's now prospects of new large reactors, both at the Bruce site in southern Ontario and in Peace River in northern Alberta. So it really is an unfinishable agenda when it comes to the nuclear industry and their generation of waste, and then the requirements to manage or isolate that waste in the long term. So the contaminated water, ultimately, the waste, if they can successfully transport it to the site, and if they can successfully process it at the site, and if they can successfully get it underground, that's all the easy part. Very, very challenging at each step. That's the easy part. The hard part is keeping it in. And as Gordon mentioned, there's no plans for long-term monitoring or mitigation when those containers fill. And when the containers fill, the water goes from ground to surface and into the watersheds, both the Wabigoon and the Turtle Rainy River watersheds, into international waters, the Turtle Rainy River watershed. So NWMO, their project, they call it adaptive phase management. It's been very adaptive. It's been changing pretty much constantly in the 20 years since they released their so-called plan. It's got 4 stages: extraction, transportation, processing, and emplacement. And then the post-operation stage, which is abandonment. They say very little about extraction, which is going to, I think, also be very challenging. Recently, they responded to a colleague of ours in an email saying that they would use hot cells at the reactor station sites. Up to that time, they had said just that the waste owner is responsible for the retrieval and transfer. Transportation is a very large issue because of the hundreds of communities along the transportation route, and because of the risk, both in normal operations, what's called normal operations, where there will be low levels of radiation, but no exposure to radiation is without commensurate risk. And then the risk of accident and potential for rupture or failure, breach of the container, and so a much larger release. And then there's also the risk of terrorist activity along the transportation route. So the NWMO, when they talk about this, they always talk about, they've got a certain story they tell about the international standards and the drop test and the puncture test and the fire test and the water test. Only through an access to information request that took 2 years to process were we able to confirm that, in fact, the drop test and the puncture tests were half scale in the 1980s, not fully successful, not fully complete. The thermal test and the water immersion tests, they can substitute computer modeling and calculations. And I think that narrative, that story that the industry tells to communities over and over again about the safety, the rigorous testing, and so on, and then you discover that it doesn't actually apply to the real world of transportation of nuclear waste in Canada. I think that's a pretty good poster child for the way the industry has interacted and story told in a misleading way with the Canadian people, First Nations and non-Indigenous. We did a project a few years ago, well, I guess several years ago now, with the Ontario Law Association, we wanted to know, most of our region are first responders, volunteer firefighters, First Nation and small communities. And we wanted to know how they were being supported, what information, what training were they being given, and so on. And we found they were being given very little training, very little information, and what they were was misleading. So sorry, I thought I had another slide there. So the guide that you just saw, it actually tells first responders that there is minimal risk in approaching a radioactive package due to the durability of the packaging. So our first responders can go out in the case of an accident, of which we have many between transport trucks in our region, and our first responders go out, they look at their guidebook and it says minimal risk in approaching. We can presume that they would approach. And that is absolutely misleading and unfair, because there is risk in approaching this material, even if the container isn't breached, and certainly if the container is breached, and no one would know until the approach was made. So lots of issues with transportation. The documents overlook radiation risk. The dose estimates are based on a careful extrapolation of calculations. First responders are poorly protected. And the transportation packages have not been subject to full-scale testing. Then we get to processing at the site, transferring the waste from the transportation container to the used fuel container, the final container, in the used fuel packaging plant. And I guess you can call it risk, because there is the risk in terms of what happens to us when we're exposed. It's not the kind of risk that you would say with transportation, that there's a risk of an accident. You know, risk is probability times consequence. The probability of releases from the used fuel package plant are certain. And so the risk is how much is going to be released, how long are workers and others going to be exposed to it, and how much damage is it going to do. But there are going to be releases from each part of the NWMO's project, but from the used fuel packaging plant, it'll also generate new low and intermediate level waste. It'll generate liquid level waste, liquid radioactive waste, and both water and air from the underground facility, from the deep geological repository. Air will be vented from deep underground with no ventilation, with no filtering. The surface air will be used to dilute that. And similarly, there will be water pumped from underground and pumped to retention ponds and then released. NWMO hasn't really released project details since 2021, and there were no details around the treatment, the standards, and so on, that water would be subject to. So then we have emplacement, and NWMO in 2016 came up with something called adaptive repository layout. Before that, the graphics all showed shafts down, a set of panels, straight rows, emplacement rooms off those tunnels. And then in 2016, they came out with adaptive repository layout, which basically, as we see their initial drill results from the 6 holes at the Revel site, we understand adaptive repository layout means basically they're going to figure out as they go, they're going to sink the shafts, and then they're going to look for spaces where there is the least amount of fracturing, fissioning, rock instability at depth. So that's adaptive repository layout. Trying to get it, move on again. And the NWMO talks about their multi-barrier approach. You know, they'll have backfill and they'll have the containers with the copper container. If we had time, we could look at each of these barriers and talk about how they will fail, and how even if you add up a whole bunch of failures, you don't have protection. They talk about multiple barrier, it's redundancy, defense in depth, but if each of the barriers fail, and by our assessment and technical understanding, they will each fail. It's just a matter of time. And again, it's how much, how soon, to what effect in terms of the releases, eventual releases from the deep geological repository. And even the NWMO doesn't say that there won't be releases. And neither did their predecessor, Atomic Energy of Canada Limited. So in summary, they've used a flawed siting process, which we didn't even discuss, the determination of consent, excluded transportation, those downstream, and their claim of consent in the two communities that NWMO calls a host community is their claim of consent is quite challengeable, and we have challenged it. And transportation is the risk that will continue for 50 years, 2 to 3 trucks a day. And the DGR, the whole design is still at a conceptual level. And there are uncertainties with every barrier. And there's no operating an approved deep geological repository for high-level waste anywhere in the world. So the Wabigoon Lake Ojibwe Nation is the most immediate downstream. They did announce that they would agree with the NWMO continuing to site characterization. The day NWMO announced that they had selected the site, Wabigoon Lake Ojibwe Nation said that they would hold their own process, that their yes vote to site characterization did not constitute support for the project. But they are in discussions with the NWMO, and they are being funded by the NWMO. And there's there's a real privacy between the about the NWMO's relationship and what the exchange is between Wabigoon Lake Ojibwe Nation and NWMO, which we have a number of Wabigoon Lake Ojibwe Nation members in our alliance, which is We the Nuclear Free North. And there are concerns. We hear these concerns not just from people outside the community, but from people inside the community. A few weeks after the NWMO announced the site selection, Eagle Lake First Nation, the other immediately downstream First Nation, announced their legal challenge. And they are challenging the NWMO's having selected only Wabigoon Lake Ojibwe Nation and not also the sister community of Eagle Lake First Nation, and having denied Eagle Lake First Nation the right to be a host community and the right to consent or to not consent to being a host community. So their application is still in the courts. NWMO is a party, Wabigoon Lake Ojibwe Nation is a party. We could talk more about that. So in summary, there's no willing to host, and we're all at risk along the transportation and downstream. In July of this year, NWMO announced the launch of their impact assessment process, and they did this with as much fanfare as they could muster, and they referred to IPD engagement activities. IPD is the initial project description, and under Canadian law, it has very definite requirements about the information that you have to provide. And the NWMO's initial project description didn't meet those requirements, not by a very, very, very long shot. And yet they called these the initial project description. And when we do comment on the initial project description, the actual one, it won't be to the NWMO, it'll be to the Impact Assessment Agency. NWMO held very, very few sessions. They held 2 one-hour online sessions. And we attended one of those. And very surprisingly, the NWMO announced in that session on August 6th that transportation was out of scope for the impact assessment. And we're not going to talk in a lot of detail, not just because I don't have that much time, but also because, I think that NWMO might be interested in our legal and expert assessment on why this is such a misguided statement on their part. But they said very clearly and very definitely that the transportation is not part of the submission they're going to be put forward, and it's not part of the impact assessment process, which is simply incorrect. Transportation is part of the project. Therefore, it is part of the scope of the impact assessment. And we're very puzzled as to why NWMO is making these kinds of statements before the impact assessment begins. And I'll just say it's not helpful. We do a lot of work across many, many projects, not just nuclear projects, to support public engagement in impact assessment. It used to be called environmental assessment and other permitting processes. And it's simply not helpful for the proponent to come out with these very erroneous statements before the process even begins. So 7 things you can do. Get engaged, pass resolutions, organize meetings, learn about the project, and join us. Oh, and our previous slide was meant to be this. Oh, meant to be this one that says, you know, please do get in touch through Northwatch or We the Nuclear Free North. We have a series of videos that we produced this summer that give a lot more detail to the assessment process and the project and the background to the project. But I'll stop now and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Brennain. That was incredible. Okay. And now, I think, yes, a lot of people appreciated that. We
Sorry,
hear,
Beth, you are off camera. Can you please turn on your video?
oh, right. Okay, so speaking for our SOS team and Ecological Options Network, we are in a lot of discussion here in the United States about the various virtues of rolling stewardship as opposed to deep geological burial, for one thing. And we also want to underscore the connection between nuclear civilian power and the nuclear weapons push. So knowing that, I just want to thank all participants today and our panelists, and also encourage further discussion based on all of the wisdom that we've heard so far. And Morgan, Jim, would you like to say anything? And then Morgan will play a very short video that talks about rolling stewardship.
I'll just briefly say that according to the United Nations, this is international, or tomorrow will be the International Nuclear Abolition Day, which is probably not high on people's celebratory list, but should be. But I just want to point out that the World Nuclear Industry Status Report, which has just come out, Michael Snyder and company doing a great job again, as they have for several years before, announces that of all the nuclear reactors that have been commissioned and come online in the last 70 years, probably more than a third of them are now shut. And I would just like to point out that that really contradicts the claims of the First Church of the Last Nuke Standing, that there is a nuclear revival going on. So I want to just point out the serendipity of that announcement coming from the World Nuclear Industry Status Report to encourage us all in our efforts, because it's great to see this formation, which I hope will go on beyond the Trans-Pacific, beginning to form at the local authority level. There's a wonderful organization here in California called Teatro Campesino, and they have a very empowering chant that I'm fond of, which is, "Ain't no power like the power of the people, because the power of the people don't stop." So thanks to everybody for attending, and congratulations to Richard for initiating this process.
Thank you. And also, Jim, would you mute?
Take it away, Morgan, too.
But I also wanted to mention that Jackie Cabasso is here, and we're very, very honored to have her. And she is very responsible for the Nuclear Abolition Day, and she can speak about that a little bit later. Thank you. Okay, Morgan.
Okay. So right now I'm focused on, my role at SOS is focused on making small shareable shorts that we're posting on our socials. And so we just wanted to share, who can share? Why is it not letting me share? There we go. What one of them is looking like. Can you all see it? Okay.
We can see it.
I started researching the nuclear waste, and I found out we have a major problem here at San Onofre and actually in the whole country.
It's going to be at least several decades when the waste has to remain here because it's not even safe to transport in its current condition. We know ocean levels are rising, tsunamis are inevitable.
Swiss solution for temporary storage is thick wall casks, fully monitored to prevent radioactive releases, stored in buildings for environmental and security protection, hot cell facility so they can maintain and continued stewardship from generation to generation. That's the best we have right now.
We know how to package it. We know how to package it well enough to keep it out of the environment. We know how to improve the packaging. In fact, we can do this from generation to generation. The next generation can do a better job than we did. And the generation after that can do a still better job. And this is what we call rolling stewardship. It's retrievable, it's monitored, and you can perfect it. You can improve it. The whole idea here is to always improve the storage from generation to generation, not just to watch the storage that exists and allow it to crumble before your eyes.
We need to protect everything from this nuclear waste for many, many decades and give the future generations a chance to find that solution. We have to expect it might take several decades, maybe a century, who knows? So we may just have to continue rolling stewardship and improving, repairing, replacing as we go. And in the meantime, we're protecting future generations, not just ourselves.
Thank you, Morgan.
I wanted to say something. Would that be okay? I wanted to express my enormous gratitude for everyone who spoke and so many who are here in the webinar, because I know how much incredible work so many of you have been doing for decades and decades and decades on this issue that doesn't have a lot of attention on it right now. And I think that you've just done such extraordinary things, and it's such a overwhelming and yet like essential fight that we have to do. And so I'm concerned that the issue is so removed from the wider public and the larger consciousness that it's only dragging the incredible work that you are doing back, because without having the public behind you, then how can you have that force? And so social media has to play a role in this. And I hope something like these small shareable shorts that we can share on social media can help with that. But it is the nature of the algorithm has to be community based. So that means that please, we'll put our socials in the chat, and we will also put the link to what we just watched. And I'm posting more over the next few days. We're trying to spread it out to, get that algorithm. But if you see those, please follow them and please share them. just or like them and interact with them. That boosts the algorithm. We need to get this message out. People need to see it in front of their eyes. They need to hear these facts in short, digestible bits. And that's the only way to do this that I know how. So yeah, I hope that we can, band together, and Eon will be producing these, and please give us a follow, like, or comment.
Thank you, Morgan. She uh, referring to our San Onofre syndrome website and social media presence. Many of us on this webinar probably aren't that involved with social media. I mean, I think it's more popular with the younger generation, and thank goodness we have Morgan working with us to help bridge that gap. I see Gordon has his hand up.
Just like to mention two things, if I could. One is that I can't copy the chat for some reason. I hope the chat is going to be circulated after the event, because I for some reason, I can't copy it myself.
Rest assured, it will be, Gordon.
And the second thing I wanted to say is that we have had a number of successes in Quebec here, where I live, which involves international cooperation. We had a nuclear company that wanted to send 16 100-ton contaminated steam generators through the Great Lakes, through the St. Lawrence River, across the Atlantic Ocean. And we stopped it not by legal means, or not by preventing them from getting the permissions. They got all the permissions that they needed to go ahead, but by mobilizing cities, the Great Lakes Cities Initiative, cities like Chicago, Toronto, Montreal, Quebec City, and others, as well as over 300 municipalities in Quebec signed resolutions. And it was simply the pushback from Native people and from these cities that caused the company to simply stop planning to do it. They just said, we've got all the permission, but we're not going to do it. In a similar way, we stopped a nuclear waste repository in Vermont. They had to go back and rewrite the law by making it into an international incident. So I just want to re-emphasize that the message that Richard gave us in through the history of his group really shows us one way to go, and that is to reach out and stimulate cooperation with all these municipalities. That makes a great, huge difference. And you'd be surprised how many people that you think don't know anything about the subject, when they get a chance to weigh in, they often do with gusto.
Thank you, Gordon. And we have a question from Jan. How long ago was that?
In the chat, CCNR, it's Canadian Coalition for Nuclear Responsibility, CCNR at web.ca. I wrote a thing called The Saga of the Steam Generators, and it documents the whole story. It's interesting.
And very empowering. Also, we have present here Diane Dorigo, who's got many victories under her belt in the United States, focusing on stopping radioactive waste dumps. Diane, if you would care to share any of those empowering stories.
I guess one thing is that with the simple message of low level is not low risk, we were able to stop every so-called low-level nuclear waste dump in the United States. The government passed a law in 1980 and amendments in 85 calling for a new so-called low-level waste dumps. And the first one opened, the only one that opened, well, the one that opened under that was in Texas in 2014. So it took all those decades for them to get away with making a new unlined soil trenches for nuclear waste. And then the other bigger victory that is now threatened by an executive order is preventing waste from being deregulated. And I've worked with colleagues in the UK on this, the low-level radiation campaign and many others. I think that the group that is on the call today was part of it, preventing nuclear waste from being declared below regulatory concern or cleared or there were a whole bunch of terms to let it go into regular garbage and recycling. And we were able to stop that in the US. I'm not sure the status in the UK, but in the European Union, because the nuclear industry has such a strong role, they picked a clearance level of 10 microsieverts or 1 millirem a year to allow for release and recycle of radioactive materials. But in the US, we have not done that. And the executive order, one of them, calls for choosing a clearance level. And we're going to have to fight like hell to prevent that.
Thank you, Diane. Gary?
Yeah, hi.
Here,
It's
Gary
great.
Hedrick, who's one of the main characters in our documentary, SOS, the San Onofre Syndrome, Nuclear Power's Legacy. Go ahead, Gary.
Yeah,
And a
watch it and
major
you'll see me
force.
age before your eyes.
He's a
So-
major force in his region. Congratulations on your
Well, thank
work.
you very much. I was wanting to chime in on what Gordon was pointing out about the municipal level being effective and city to city and all that, and just bring up that September 30th is going to be a very important date in our local efforts with Irvine City, which, you know, it's right there behind LA and San Diego. They are exploring a plan. September 30th is the introduction of the idea, and then October they'll be voting on whether to invest in our own municipal level plan that competes with what the Edison company is doing. So I just encourage you to watch because it will be available online September 30th at 2 o'clock Pacific time. And I don't have the links yet, but we'll send them out. Hopefully you guys will be able to get to see history in the making there. Thank you.
Gary, is it a vote of the city council?
It will be a vote in October. This is just a workshop to explain what the problem is, let people think about it until October, and then take a vote.
They're actually, the thinking behind it is more or less rolling stewardship. So we're hoping that it won't get diluted along the way. Gordon? You're muted, Gordon.
I think Wendy was before me. Wendy O'Connor with We the Nuclear Free North. Wendy, did you want to say something?
No, I was just giving a thumbs up or an applause to something, Gordon.
Okay. All right. Well, I just wanted to remind people, this webinar originates from California. In California, it was the Citizens Initiative that brought legislation before the California legislature to ban nuclear power plants because of a lack of waste disposal facilities. And what happened was, in order to forestall that Citizens Initiative, the governor of California introduced his own bill into the legislature, saying that there'll be no more licensing of nuclear power plants unless it can be shown that nuclear waste disposal is acceptable. The legislature then passed this job on to the California Energy Resources and Conservation Development Commission. They had public hearings and they concluded that there is no safe method now, and they thought that maybe there never will be. And as a result of that, it's illegal today to license new reactors in California. But that was the citizens' initiative. So it just shows you what citizens can do if they're determined to push forward.
Thank you, Gordon. Are there any other questions or comments?
Mary Beth, if anybody, I just want to add that if anybody put questions in the chat. If they'd like to raise their hands now and present them to the speakers, that would be wonderful. And I see Michael has his hand up right now, and then Jan. So there we go.
Yeah, I did see Jan Bodart. I'm hoping she'll announce Night with Experts this evening with David Kraft, going to be taking up a moratorium issue state by state. Thank you.
Wait, Michael, could you say explain a little bit more?
This evening will be the Night with Experts, and David Kraft will be presenting. He's going to be presenting on moratoriums state by state and the move to have those repealed. And I see Jan's on the call, and I'm hoping she can give us some particulars.
Yeah, go to neis.org, neis.org, and then at the top you'll see the word events. You go to, when you click on events, you get a calendar, and the calendar will have on it September 25th, and there will be a link there to register for Night with the Experts tonight. And David Kraft will be presenting the difficulties in Illinois with rescinding the moratorium that has been in force since I want to say 82. I'm not sure of how long it's been in force, but a long time. And it was in force because there's nothing to do with the waste. And but even though there's still nothing to do with the waste, they want to rescind the moratorium. So but it's not just Illinois. Ohio has done this. No, Wisconsin has done this. And one other state that I can't think of right now, but there are about 5 states that have followed suit and are rescinding their moratoria. And so, yes, please.
Can I help? Yeah. So in Montana was the first state in the country to do what Gordon was describing that California did. It prohibited any new nuclear power to be built in that state until there's an operating repository to take that waste. And the nuclear industry has been working very hard to overturn those statewide bans. There were over 20, I'm not sure if there were 30 in the country. And it's my understanding that's what Dave is going to talk about tonight on the webinar, The Night with the Experts, Dave Kraft. And so it's to go over all the moratoria, statewide moratoria, and the threat to those that are being waged by the nuclear industry as they try to make new nukes in states that currently or previously banned them.
Thank you so much, Diane. But I want to repeat, go to neis.org, click events at the top of the page. You'll get a calendar, and on that calendar, go to September 25th, and that's how you'll get a link to the, that's how you'll register to come tonight. But I wanted to say something else about the safety of nuclear power, because yes, Sunday was Sunday, and we had an event, and I talked to a gentleman there who said he didn't want to sign our card to the governor asking him not to let this happen. And he said there ought to be a way to make this safe. And I went through my speech about the 4 forces in the universe that are recognized by nuclear physicists, one of which is called the weak nuclear force. It's one of the 4 ways that the universe is constructed. It is what causes radiation. It cannot be changed. You can't get rid of it. You can't work around it. The only thing you can do is try to mitigate the danger. But nuclear power and nuclear waste cannot be made safe. So that's my story.
I saw a hand from a Zoom user. There you are. Do you still have a comment that you would like to make? And okay, unmute yourself. Thanks.
Yes, hello from Wales. I'd like to ask a couple of questions, please. I don't know whether you're aware of it over there in America and Canada, but we've got a lot of your companies looking to build SMNRs over here, and they're misinforming people about their success in building SMRs, even though none of them have got any operating anywhere.
Right.
And people who are unaware in Wales sort of believe in their hype. And my other question is, given that all this information, like Gordon knows and gives us, why do politicians choose to ignore all this information for political purposes? Thank you.
Great question. Thank you. Before we go on to the other questioners, Gordon or Brennain, would you like, and Richard, would you like to respond?
Well, I could respond, I guess. I think that most politicians live in a kind of an echo chamber, and the nuclear industry has been has been present in government circles longer than any government has been in power, and they know all the ropes. And we have found in Canada that the agency which we have, which is the Minister of Natural Resources, is infiltrated with people from the nuclear industry, and they are the chief advisors on nuclear issues. And the result is that there's a lot of misinformation and misimpressions that are given to the government, which they basically believe. Part of the problem here is that it's not really accountable in the Parliament. Is that, for instance, our regulator has very, very rarely appeared before the parliamentary body. And when they have, they've looked really kind of shabby. And parliamentarians have not been impressed with the answers they hear from the commissioners, but they almost never have a chance to cross-examine them or to question them. So there is a real problem here politically and economically of the political and economic forces behind nuclear having the ear of our decision makers, and the people who are on the outside do not have that opportunity. That's part of the problem.
Thanks, Gordon. Richard?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo that. And what we see in Britain is we have groups like Britain Remade, which you may have heard of. So Britain Remade is an organisation that's been lobbying very heavily for deregulation, particularly of nuclear, new nuclear, and it mostly comprises people that used to work for Boris Johnson's office as policy advisors. So very much at the heart of government and very much with their own agenda. I think the other issue, though, is in the case of some of our politicians that they're links with trade unions, because amongst the biggest advocates for new nuclear are the industry trade unions, and a lot of our Labour MPs, particularly, are sponsored by those unions. And because of their affiliation with them, then they will obviously push those union agendas, which include advocacy for new nuclear. So you find that a lot of the more vociferous supporters of new nuclear tend to be kind of the latest batch of MPs pushing for new nuclear plants in their own constituencies quite actively. So that I think those are two factors, certainly particularly to the UK, that are relevant.
Thank you. Thank you. Stephen?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Whoops. Okay. I wanted to bring up the international scene in terms of there's a lot of countries using nuclear, and have we learned anything from how they're handling it or not handling it? England, Germany, France, Finland, even the Russians and the Chinese. And my impression is that the myth is that it can be handled someday. Therefore, the need is being put forth for energy, so people just go ahead and turn their head. But anyway, is there any information now or later on how the waste is being handled or not handled, and things that we can learn from that?
Thank you, Stephen. You know, Tor, maybe you would have some comments about that. Tor has his hand up too.
Yes, thank you. My name is Tor. I've just put my contact details or our website on the chat. I represent an organisation called Highlands Against Nuclear Power, way up in the far north of Scotland, and we have a plant here called Dounreay, Dounreay, right in the far north of Scotland. It was three experimental reactors that operated for about 20 years. On the point that Gordon was making earlier, it hardly produced any electricity and is now going to take 80 years to decommission at a cost of £8.7 billion. So, you know, it just illustrates, I think, the issues that we've been discussing this evening. And there is no appetite for nuclear in Scotland. I'm pleased to say our current Scottish government, which has planning powers, can prevent any new nuclear development in Scotland. And the majority at the moment is the Scottish National Party. And we hope that'll continue after the elections in May next year. So we're nuclear free to an extent that we have two power stations still operating, but they're due to close in a couple of years' time. And there is no appetite either for new nuclear or for nuclear waste repositories. So, you know, in that sense, we're pleased with that position. But of course, nuclear has no boundaries, so they could build them anywhere in the UK and it would still have an effect on us. So that's our position. But I think, you know, our position here it illustrates exactly what Gordon was saying about being the most expensive power that we can produce, but also the waste issues which we have no solution on. And as far as my information is concerned, the plants built in Occolo in Finland, for example, and in one or two other countries, they've been built, but they have not got their full licenses to operate yet. So it just shows you some of the issues that are connected to this issue of waste. And I think this evening has been a fantastic experience to listen to Canadians and Americans about your experience and the argument that Gordon put forward for, you know, above ground and monitored, I think is exactly the solution that we would be promoting here too. We have to transport our high-level nuclear waste 400 miles plus by rail on a rail line which is considered to be not fit for purpose down to Sellafield, where also there are 500 tons in storage with no solution to what they're going to do with it. So it just shows the enormity of the issues and the importance of our joint campaigns to stop this madness. Thank you.
Thank you, Tor.
Thank you. That's really...
Brennain, did you want to respond to that question about the why the politicians, or did you have your hand up to say something?
Actually, I wanted to respond to Stephen's question about the state of nuclear waste, geological disposals, or long-term management proposals internationally. And there's a whole list of them. You know, Sweden was first off the mark, 2011. They filed their application, still don't have a final approval. They've got a political approval, but they don't have their final permits, and it's certainly not operating. Finland now, well, they've got a construction, they've constructed the site characterization facility, which is their underground facility, but they still don't have an operating facility, an operating permit, and it's been delayed. It was filed December 2021, and it's already been delayed twice. We don't know when that's going to come out. France, Switzerland, Canada, the UK, they've all got deep geological repositories, different rock media, variations on the design, but what they all have in common is they have, it seems, unlimited access to public funds to promote, to persuade, and to design their projects. And there's a real club. There's a real mutual reinforcement. They do some research projects. The Mount Terry Research Project in Switzerland is international partnership. So all of those different proponents all participate in that research project, and they're very supportive of each other. So Richard and I have traded notes about, the NWMO, the Nuclear Waste Management Organization in Canada, goes and speaks to the communities that are being persuaded and promoted and pursued by the UK Nuclear Waste Services. We have SKB from Sweden brought in by the NWMO to come and speak to our communities in Northern Ontario. And it's all to tell this story of how good it is, when really they're all still at a conceptual stage. There's no operating deep geological repository anywhere in the world. There's no track record of success. They haven't even demonstrated that single dimensions of their project will be successful in the longer term. But I think one of the real challenges we have is that all of these promoters, all of these proponents, NWMO, SKB, Nuclear Waste Services, have access to government, and they exercise that access very, very regularly. We have been, Gordon and I were both part of Nuclear Waste Watch, did a major policy review, nuclear waste policy review, began about 5 years ago now. And we met once with the First Minister, and that was it. And if we look at the lobby, we can see the lobbyist registry. We can see how often those senior bureaucrats and those ministers are meeting with the nuclear industry and their consultants and their fellow travelers. And in Canada, and I'm sure elsewhere, a big part of the nuclear lobby, it's not just the proponents, it's not just the companies, it's the engineering firms. It's all the companies who make so much money off of these nuclear projects. And they're in those offices, if not daily, let's just say very, very regularly. So part of the problem, I think it's great that we have an international alliance, because the industry certainly does. Thanks.
Yeah, could I just do a rapid follow on to what Brennain just said?
Absolutely.
I wanted to mention that outside of Finland, nobody has broken ground on a high-level waste repository. Those different countries she mentioned. And also, there have been a couple of significant failures that have come to light. In Germany, the Assa 2 salt mine, which was for low and intermediate level waste, has become a fiasco. And the government has now revealed that this deep geological repository for much less dangerous waste has to be taken back up to the surface again out of that repository, because it's contaminating the groundwater and has been doing so for decades. And so it has been a failure, and it'll take 30 years, and it's very dangerous to get that stuff back up to the surface again. Going to cost at least $5 billion Canadian equivalent. They also have another situation in the only deep geological repository in the United States is the one at Carlsbad, New Mexico. Once again, for lower level waste, military plutonium contaminated waste. It had an incident with a fire and an exploding drum of waste, which turned into a flamethrower and sent plutonium dust 750 meters vertically up to the surface, contaminated 22 workers, and then blew downstream towards Carlsbad, New Mexico. Cost a couple of $1 billion to get it restarted in a couple of years, but that kind of thing was simply not supposed to happen at all. So as a result of that, even some of the ardent proponents of deep geological repositories are now seriously thinking of including a retrievability as a serious aspect of the project. In other words, we don't just bury it and walk away. We have to make it retrievable in some form. But that's really not easy to say, not so easy to do. Thank you.
And if I could just add, Finland's construction license, their licensing sequence was very different than, say, Canada. So they got the construction license to create their geological characterization facility. It was for the purpose of characterizing the underground. It wasn't for the purpose of disposal, although they will use some of those same ramps and tunnels. It wasn't very many months ago that there was a big announcement that they had brought in some German contractors to do the first ever, they're doing in-floor borehole placement. So different from the Canadian system, they're going to place the waste in containers, in capsules that go in boreholes in the floor. And it wasn't many months ago that it was a big nuclear waste industry news story that they just done the first trial run of being able to put a mock canister in the ground. So that's how immature these projects are, even though we are all being told, and the world is being told, and the politicians are being told that these are mature projects. They are not. They are concepts.
Thank you so much, Brennain. Let's see, Jan, do you mind? I'm going to go to and Dee, because you've already spoken. I'd like to have Jackie Cabasso speak first.
Okay, thank you very much. I am known these days mostly for my work on nuclear weapons abolition, but I got my start in the nuclear or the anti-nuclear field canvassing for the Nuclear Safeguards Initiative in California that was mentioned. That was, I think, 1976. So I'm I've always been very aware of and concerned about the connections, the entanglements between nuclear weapons and nuclear power. And I wanted to just mention another connection, which you may or may not be aware of, but in the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which gets some attention now, where the original 5 nuclear armed states promised to negotiate in good faith the elimination of their nuclear weapons at an early date. And the countries that forswore nuclear weapons, almost every other country in the world, were promised an inalienable right to peaceful nuclear technology. Those are the two pillars of the treaty. The disarmament obligation and the non-proliferation obligation are the two pillars of the treaty that get the most attention. But if you go to the review conferences, which I do every year, more and more the promotion of peaceful nuclear technology has been sold as the highest priority. And representatives from the International Atomic Energy Agency and from many countries talk about nuclear power as if, and they almost literally say, peaceful nuclear technology will solve all of humankind's problems. And I mean, it's unbelievable. It's surreal. And so I just want you to know that that is another line of pressure and propaganda that is very much in play in the international community, in the international nuclear community among governments. And the other issue that I think is worth adding in now to our discussion is the weaponization of nuclear power plants, because we have seen that in Ukraine for the first time in history, with Zaporizhia and other targeted facilities. So we know that's no longer a theoretical. It has happened, and it is happening. So having said that, I wanted to just take Mary Beth's invitation and just mention the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons, which is a UN day, September 26th. It was adopted in 2013 by the General Assembly because of the growing frustration of non-nuclear armed states with the failure of the nuclear armed states to meet their disarmament obligations under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And it has been underutilized. So this year, a group of folks from many countries got together, formed an ad hoc working group, and put together a platform, nuclearabolitionday.org. We circulated a joint appeal, which is going to be presented to the governments tomorrow. It has now been signed by over 500 organizations around the world and over 800 individuals. And it calls on leaders, legislators, and officials at all levels of government, local, municipal, states, counties, and regional bodies, to affirm that the threat or use of nuclear weapons is inadmissible, to advance tangible measures by nuclear armed and allied states to implement this obligation, including standing down nuclear forces and adopting policies never to initiate a nuclear war, pledge to achieve the global elimination of nuclear weapons no later than the UN's centennial anniversary in 2045, and immediately undertake actions, including through multilateral negotiations, to implement this pledge, to cut nuclear weapons budgets and end public and private investments in the nuclear weapons industry, and redirect these funds to strengthen the United Nations, advance peacekeeping and conflict resolution, accelerate steps to protect the climate, and meet human and economic needs as required under Article 26 of the UN Charter. So I mentioned that I just want you to be aware of this. I invite you, you can still add your organization's name or your individual name. And there's also a social media action which goes along with it. Again, it's nuclearabolitionday.org. And having been reminded, which is something I well know, but of the just horrendous problem of nuclear waste. I mean, I think, Gordon, you said it very well, one of humanity's most serious unsolved problems. Nuclear weapons are also one of humanity's most serious unsolved problems, and the dangers today are arguably greater than they have ever been. So thank you for letting me interject that.
Thank you. Thank you, Jackie. And again, Jan and Diane, do you mind if I go to a couple of people who have not spoken yet? Frank, can you? Yeah, thank you.
So I live in the South, a very nuclear friendly area next to the most successful nuclear power plant, I think, in the world. And there is now mounted by something called the Nuclear Company with roots in South Carolina, privately funded. We're going to build new nuclear plants with AI. So they have mounted a 20 university bus tour, and they've carefully selected the universities to include the two major universities in my state, the University of South Carolina and Clemson University, where I have friends on a different page as far as nuclear power's future. I attended the Clemson University. I was well attended. There were probably 150 students, virtually everyone lured there by a flyer, which is saying we're hiring nuclear engineers, and then lots of things related to AI and computing. So this is a challenge to Morgan. If you would please look up and watch the Nuclear Frontier, and you and your skilled social media team pass to me and any of the rest of you some talking points about this propaganda film that I had to sit through for 45 minutes last night. It's clearly well funded, and yet it was somewhat frustrating to hear the touting of the future of nuclear power with the lies that we all know this prospect is built upon. So thank you for doing this, and keep in mind that this company also says they have contracts in Saskatchewan for all the nuclear fuel they would ever need. So I'm wondering, so the Canadian government is issuing contracts to a startup nuclear country, guaranteeing the availability of nuclear fuel. I'm just baffled. So
Frank,
thank you for what you're doing.
Frank, thank you so much. Could you please put the information in the chat so that we can share it with everyone?
Sure.
Okay, thanks, Frank. All right, Catherine?
You hear me?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, I'm with West Michigan here in the Great Lakes state of Michigan. And nobody's brought this up, but the Great Lakes are at risk for nuclear contamination. They want to reopen a defective nuclear reactor, Palisades. It's been sitting there for 2 years, decaying. And they haven't met safety standards, and they're trying to get to bypass things. Nuclear engineer Arnie Gunderson gave a talk about the problems with Palisades, and he says it's at great risk of blowing. He doesn't know whether it's going to be a Chernobyl type, or local, which would be like Michigan. Anyway, that's a major concern. Also, they want to put 2 SMRs there. They want to put SMRs up where Big Rock Point is, up by Traverse City. And I think that the whole thing about the SMRs from the conception of them has been, how can they get away with it? You know, like they did some building and stuff on hilltops because they wouldn't have to address flooding, which would be an issue, and things like that. But this SMR stuff has been going on for decades. They started it quite early. And everybody thought it wouldn't really go anywhere because it's so expensive. But to reopen Palisades, they got $1.5 million, and from the state of Michigan to reopen, and billions from Trump for all this nuclear stuff. So I think that in the future, well, right now, we really need to protect our water, you know, because radioactivity is forever. And the Great Lakes holds a tremendous amount of fresh water. It's just, I was just up at Lake Superior, and it's absolutely beautiful. And Lake Michigan, and to risk this great resource for the world, to me, it's something we really need to stop right now. Don't Waste Michigan. There's a group, a coalition, Beyond Nuclear, Don't Waste Michigan, and other groups that are trying to stop the reopening of Palisades. But anything that anyone can do to help out would be greatly appreciated. Kevin Camps of Beyond Nuclear and Michael Keegan, who's in the chat, are 2 great resource people for that. So that's what I wanted to say, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. That's such an incredibly concerning situation. Okay, let's see. Jan?
Thank you for calling on me, Mary Beth. I have something a little bit lighter to talk about, and that is, you know, those 4 forces that I was telling you about. One is called a graviton, and then there's the photon, which is the light. That's one of the forces. And then and I know the strong nuclear force is called a boson or something, and the weak nuclear forces, you know, I'm not very good at this. But there is a 5th force called the lavon. And our person who is here, yeah, she's still here. Her name is Linda Williams, but she goes by Linda Lavon. And I'm hoping that we will understand the kind of work she does as the star of the Atomic Cabaret. And I don't want to, I would just love to hear from her. I came so late, we might have already talked to her, but if we haven't, I really would like to hear Linda talk about herself and what she does, if it's possible.
Okay, thank you.
I think she's here.
Until Linda responds, Diane, do you want to go ahead?
Oh, hello. Sorry. Were you calling on me, Linda Williams?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Hi, I'm here. I had to step out for a minute. So, do you want me to say something about Hawaii?
Well, I just thought that, are you not the star of the Atomic Cabaret?
I am indeed.
And I want people to know about you because you're here, and I know the work that you do. I mean, everything has been so heavy. This is a really, really serious subject. Yeah. And Linda writes songs and performs. I've never seen her do it, but anyway, I want to get out of here and hear what Linda has to say.
Well, thank you so much for that. You can go to atomiccabaret.com and see all my songs that include such hits as Depleted Uranium and Nuclear Winter. Anyway, I just wanted to talk briefly because I'm so grateful to be here. Currently, Hawaii has a constitutional amendment that there has to be a 2/3 approval by both houses in the state legislature in order to approve a fission reactor to be built on Hawaii island, any of the islands, and or to store nuclear waste. So recently, a bill was introduced, a resolution to create a working group, a nuclear energy working group to study the feasibility of small modular reactors. Because the con that they're doing is they're saying literally that like we'll be able to bring the box in, plug it in, and then after it's done, unplug it and then ship it back. And so and that is the propaganda that's being perpetuated. So they won't it won't trigger the 2/3 vote requirement, or they just want to change the law. I'm on that committee. I've been I was appointed by our 350.org branch here in Hawaii chapter. So I'm pretty much the only physicist in that group, and there's 2 anti-nuclear people in the group. So I'm here to like learn more and make connections because I need some expert testimony, and because we need to make sure that this propaganda about small modular reactors is completely shredded, because good people who are usually in support of environmentalism here, and including Democrats, are being swayed by the lobby about like clean small reactors. Anyway, so that's why I'm here. I put my email in the chat. I'll put it in again if anyone's interested in supporting my work. I just started Nuclear Free Hawaii. The island I'm on is a nuclear free designated island. That's the island of Hawaii. And Jackie told me that many of the islands, Maui, Hawaii, are also members of Mayors for Peace. So we need to make sure that we keep Hawaii nuclear free. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. Mahalo.
Thank you, Linda. And before I call on you, Diane, I just wanted to respond to our guest from Wales, and to say that I would like to have a speaker specifically on, we have a friend who has fought against the Westinghouse AP 1000 in the United States to speak for about that situation in one of our next webinars. Okay.
I was actually wanting to respond to one of the questions earlier about why do the legislators always believe the nuclear industry, even though it doesn't really make any sense. And I wanted to share something that happened to me back in the 1980s when I was lobbying a legislator in Pennsylvania, and also just recently here in DC when I was lobbying our Senator, Kristen Gillibrand. The nuclear industry donates staff people to legislators. They don't have a lot of money, even if they're a high-powered senator like Gillibrand. They're happy to take donations. And so I found out back in the in the 80s, when I was giving my whole spiel about what's wrong with nuclear transport, that the guy I was talking to was from the nuclear industry and worked on transport. And so there was no way he was ever going to convey our concerns to the elected official. And then just this last 6 months ago, the guy from Gillibrand's office said he is with the nuclear, I believe it was a program of the Nuclear Energy Institute or one of the other nuclear programs. They actually take people who have graduated in nuclear sciences or nuclear engineering, and as part of their, they are paid by the industry and donated to different key Senate or leadership offices, representatives, to serve as their staffer. So I went to the office of Senator Gillibrand in Buffalo, Western New York, where we have the nuclear waste dump at West Valley. And I tried to set up a meeting, and the staffer there said, "Oh, let's do it on Zoom so we can bring in our guy from the Washington office." And it turns out, of course, that this person from the Washington office is a representative of the nuclear industry and handles everything nuclear for that US senator. So we are up against it, and I think it would behoove people to make sure when you are bothering to do this lobbying stuff, who you're talking to, and find a way to get around them.
Thank you so much, Dee. And I remember lobbying with you years ago with Diane Feinstein, and the staffer was there from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I mean,
yes, and the Department of Energy sends people. We were lobbying against deregulating waste, and the person I was talking to was on loan from the DOE arm of the EPA. They give their people a year as an intern. So our legislative officials are very much merged with the promoters.
Thank you.
Not to be negative, we were going in a positive direction on cabarets and such.
Stephen, do you?
Yeah, I do. It's Stephen Sondheim. I'm with the Nuclear Free Sierra Club. I want to raise a question which may not be able to be treated here, but there, Germany I think, got off of some of their nuclear power. And now the industry and the politicians are saying that Germany's in bad trouble, having to go back to their coal, their fossil fuels, that they don't have it, they're not solving it with renewable energy. And I've heard different stories on that that's not so or it is so. And I would like to get some answers to that. We can't hear. But the reason is that there's a lot of negativity about alternatives that's being put forth. And this contributes to people's fear and need to get enough energy. And so we need to get straight what some of the alternatives are and whether they can work or not. I still don't know the answer to that German question, but maybe we can address it sometime. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Gordon. Unmute,
I could just say something briefly about Germany. Germany is doing fine on their renewables. As a matter of fact, a lot of people don't know this, but they were burning a lot of coal, and they still are burning a good deal of coal, but they have reduced their coal usage from 80% down to 30%, and it's still going down. And they are phasing out of coal. They've succeeded in phasing out of nuclear power. They shut down the last of their 17 nuclear reactors on schedule. And there are no nuclear reactors operating in Germany now. There were 17. And with regard to energy, a lot of people don't know this, that during when Russia invaded Ukraine, there was a lot of problem with disruption of fuel supplies. People were buying fuels from Russia, and they didn't want to do it anymore. And Germany, believe it or not, was exporting electricity to France rather than vice versa, because France had half of its, I believe they have something like, I may be wrong, but I think it's 27 nuclear reactors. And back in the time when Russia first invaded Ukraine, half of France's nuclear reactors were shut down for a variety of reasons, and they were actually relying on Germany. Germany did increase coal burning in 1 year in order to help supply power to its neighbors. But outside of that rise in coal consumption that happened, it's still on track going downwards. So there's a lot of propaganda about Germany. As you can well understand, the knives are out, and the nuclear industry would love to blacken Germany's reputation as much as possible. I'm not saying everything is rosy, but it's definitely not true that that it's been a failure. That's definitely not true.
Well, it's Stephen, if you can still hear me. I suspect that was the case. I think we need to get the word out about that, because it sounds like you can get off of nuclear power and you can use viable alternatives, and we need to get that straight because it's being used against us. Thank you, Gordon.
Yes, thank you. And thanks for the question, Stephen. Okay, Peter.
Hi, thanks. Something I haven't heard discussed here is that AI is driving this nuclear renaissance now. It kind of breaks down like this. Total surveillance requires AI, which requires unprecedented amounts of power and water. Nuclear power is the fastest route to that much electricity. It's also required to make nuclear bombs. Another Cuban Missile Crisis would move too fast for humans to keep up, so AI will make all the crucial split-second decisions. it won't be ready till about 2036. Typically, it demands 150 megawatts. State of Hawaii uses 180. By 2030, the data centers will consume more electricity than steel, cement, chemicals, and all other energy-intensive industries combined. But if we don't build this, we'll be wiped out by people who are already building it. I'm open to question about whether that's actually an accurate breakdown, but I think it's pretty close. In other words, it's whack-a-mole. You can go at the issue of safety, the issue of waste, the issue, all these different angles, and you get checkmated from another direction.
Yeah. Right. Right. Good comments, Peter. Thank you very much. Gordon or Richard or Brennain, would you like to respond to that?
By the way, I'm with the working group on uranium weapons with the Veterans for Peace, and I put my address for that in one of the chat postings.
Thank you, Peter.
Oh, let me jump in to say that if you watch The Nuclear Frontier, it's as if we're at war with China, and that they put China up as going to eat our lunch in the next 5 years if we don't power our emerging AI. And let me tell you, total surveillance, what a wonderful way to get people engaged in what is AI being used for. Thank you.
Thanks, Frank. Gordon.
Yeah, for anybody to say that nuclear power is the fastest way for supplying power for anything, they're crazy. Nuclear power is very slow. I mean, the only nuclear reactors that have been built in North America, large reactors that have been built in the last, since the mid-70s, has been the Vogtle reactors down in Georgia. And those reactors are now, if you Google it yourself, you'll see that they're calling it the most expensive electrical facility in the world ever, in terms of how many millions of dollars per megawatt of installed capacity. It was more than, it was 17 years late, I think it was. The old Kilowatt reactor was an equal amount of time late in coming on scene. These things are very slow. And there's many here in Canada, we have the only, as far as I know, this is the only small modular reactor that has been authorized to actually be constructed in North America. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's the BWRX 300, and they've published cost estimates which are virtually identical to the cost that is now known for the Vogtle reactors in Georgia that are being called the most expensive electricity in the world. Now, whether they'll come in on time or not, I doubt it very much. But they're certainly coming in at just as expensive as the most expensive large reactor in North America ever built.
I think that's why they're scheduling World War III so far out into the 30s.
Yeah. So a lot of this is, the nuclear industry is really, many people don't realize the nuclear industry is in bad shape. They've really had a steeply declining market share of global electricity for the last 25 years. It's gone down from 17% to less than 10%, about 9%, and it's still going down. And they're really trying to get public funding because they cannot get private funding. So they have to scare the politicians into thinking that if they don't give billions of dollars to them to build these speculative reactors, none of which have been built before, that they're going to lose ground to the Chinese or to whatever. It's really what the nuclear industry has always depended upon is not the fact that nuclear is the best choice, but you have no choice. You have no choice. You must do this. This has always been the nuclear argument, and people fall for it. And it's not true.
Thank you, Gordon. Catherine?
Yeah. I wanted to say that I think one of the problems with alternative energy is that the nuclear corporations are the ones that are getting money to do it. And the way they do it is bullying, just like they do with the nuclear stuff, and forcing these great big giant systems down on top of people, and making their lives miserable. There are solutions, green energy, like microgrids, like they're doing in Bangladesh, where they've got the solar on top of everybody's housetops, and they've got I don't know if you've seen that documentary, it's fantastic, but the whole community is like a microgrid, and everybody works together, and it's just very cool. Also, like decentralized smaller wind and solar systems, where households and businesses, empty parking lots, et cetera, or parking lots. They have one at MSU that's got solar panels. It cools the cars and charges them. And here, there was a dam where Consumers Energy bought it and shut it down and didn't do the electric. And then the town eventually, after about 20 years of high cost, they bought the dam back and they refurbished it, and it's producing electricity for that community now. And it's way less costly than the big company corporation. Another thing that here in Michigan and in Canada, we have a lot of running water. And to harness the power of those with hydraulics, not dams, but with just, you could just have a partial, like run of the falling water through an energy system for electricity. I think that would be a solution without damming the whole river, or just disrupting the fish and the environment stuff. I think the hydraulics should be used more in the areas like Canada and Michigan, where there's so much water. And here where I live, we have a big Amish community. And you talk about green systems. One of the local systems they've got solar panels all over the place. They're using it for electricity for their businesses. They use it for electricity to charge their buggy lights, etc. And it's pretty cool. But that can, and of course, they're not hooked up to the grid. They're off the grid, and it works for them. And the solar is helping them. And this, Michigan isn't known for its sunlight, but it works. So I think these smaller systems, I don't understand why they're putting money into this crazy nuclear stuff, when if they funded the smaller systems, it could really work for a lot of people. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Keegan?
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to comment on, there we go. I just want to comment on the AI. It's a Rube Goldberg machine. What is the widget it actually generates, and its consumption? It's huge consumption and redistribution of resources from all the ratepayers, taxpayers, internet users, on up to a very confined, and it's going to use huge amounts of resources, generate huge amounts of heat, use of water, electric to boot it up, electric to cool it down. But it's a redistribution machine and a scam. And the nuclear industry loves it because it's so energy dependent. When the Chinese firm, I think DeepSeek, announced that they could do all this AI for about 5% of the cost, that kind of sent ripples through the market. I think we're looking at a big, huge bubble, hyperbole. The AI groups, industries trying to be first to market to gather market share, but I think it's going to be a pump and dump situation, and it's just stupid way to go. So that's my comment. And Eric Epstein, who's very active at 3 Mile Island, has become a pretty good expert on the AI and all the problems that are associated with it. And what's driving the government? Greed. So they're seeing dollar signs. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Keegan. Gordon?
I just wanted to mention that at COP28, there was a unanimous, on the part of all the parties that participated, virtually unanimous declaration of objective to triple renewable energy by 2030 and to double energy efficiency by the same date. Whereas there was a smaller group of countries, 25 countries, that was not approved by COP28, but used COP28 as a background to their press release, in which they said they wanted to triple nuclear electricity by 2050. That's 20 years later than what the renewable target is. The renewable target is by 2030 tripling. The nuclear tripling was by 2050. And of course, that's speculative. Meanwhile, the IAEA subsequently held what's called a nuclear summit in Brussels, in Belgium, and they included some of the top bankers of the world, and the bankers poured cold water on this. They said, there's no way the banks are going to finance this. There's no way the banks are going to put the trillions of dollars that you're talking about into tripling nuclear power. So I would like to put forward the view that what we're really talking about here is an enormous money grab, that the nuclear industry sees that there's going to be trillions of dollars on the table around the world for fighting climate change. And we, the nuclear industry, should grab as much of that money as we can. Whether or not we can deliver on our promises is irrelevant. Just grab the money, because the nuclear industry is really not doing well. It's in deep trouble. They like to give the impression of the opposite, but in fact, they're in deep trouble. And the only thing that's going to bail them out is grabbing as much federal money, government money as they can. The private money is not forthcoming. And that's what numerous projects are showing, that when push comes to shove, they just can't generate the revenue needed to build these extremely expensive projects.
Thank you, Gordon. And after Gary, I think we should wrap up. This has been incredible, but everybody has other things on their agenda, I'm sure. Thank you, Gary. Go ahead. You're muted.
Thank you. I just want to mention I posted the information how to participate in the meeting in Irvine and how important that is for not just to have us fill the 200 seats, but have a great online presence. If you could please make that effort, and that's September 30th, 2 o'clock Pacific. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Okay. So, Lisa, do you want to wrap things up?
Thank you so much, everybody. This has been an amazing conversation, and I'm thrilled that we have been able to share this time together. Thanks for sticking with us, all of you that have. I will send out the recording when it's ready. I apologize that the first couple minutes are not recorded, but the discussion was, and that's what's important. And then we also just want to say that we will be hosting another similar meeting within the next couple months. If you are not on our mailing list, please make sure to go to sanonofresyndrome.com and sign up so that you can be on our mailing list, and we will make sure to include you in the next meeting. And I think that's it for now, but we're thrilled to have all of you with us, and thank you so much.
And thank you especially to our panelists. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to do
Bravo.
a special big thank you to Richard Outram for joining us and telling us what's going on in the UK. I find it phenomenal. Good work.
Really?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. And Brennain, all the way from Albania. You never did mention that.
I didn't mention that.
Okay, great. Thanks again, everybody. I hope you join us and again in 2 months.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Have a
Be
great
safe,
day.
everybody. Thanks for all your
Thanks,
great
all.
work. Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.